now.
Thanks, Ruth. Hi, everyone. So I'm Tom Rathborn. I head up Grant Thornton's economic and political insights and affairs team. So really, what does that mean? Last 4 years working on Brexit, so helping ourselves as a firm understand it and our clients, navigate what on earth's going on, what does it mean for them, and what are the steps they can do to prepare for it. And as Ruth says, as part of that work, we got talking primarily about Brexit back at the start of this year, and then what with COVID rapidly expanded out from all things Brexit to all things business, frankly, as COVID came in and impacted. So that's a little bit about me, and I will now do my best to try and share the talkbook, which hopefully you can all see. Ruth, give us a shout if it pops up.
Yeah, it is showing. I don't know whether you want to make it any bigger. If not, then it is. That's fine. It is there.
I think that might be all I can. I mean, that might work. Is that better? Okay. So I'll just get going for it. So we created this talkbook aiming to not be too long and too complicated, but really to help set the scene with businesses to understand sort of what at the start of the year the next 12 months look like, and then refreshing it midway through the year to think about what were the specific challenges that COVID was bringing with various lockdowns, etc. So sort of structured in a way that we'd have a bit up front to help set the scene, and then dig down under the 5 key pillars to business around importing and exporting, suppliers and supply chain, finance, regulation, legal and data, and then obviously people issues. So as you see, basically up front, start with the changes that might be going on throughout the year. So there was those economic ones, behavioural, which I think we'll dig into a bit more detail on, technology. So very much keen that this wasn't just purely about Brexit, but did recognise that there are just changes going on. So the movement away from the high street to online selling, opportunities there through artificial intelligence and data capture and modelling, etc. And then also thinking about the impact on the climate and sustainability, which from our conversations with business has been rising up the agenda for some time now. So as you can see from this top page, basically what this covers was, key things to consider from a COVID and a Brexit point of view, questions that businesses should really be asking themselves. I think one of the things that we've learned through all of our work on this is that, for any of us who talk about business resilience or any of the things that are going on in the world, some things that are blindingly obvious to us haven't occurred to the people we're talking to. So just making sure that they've thought about it and checked in. And then I think most importantly, what are the practical steps that those businesses and organizations can take to respond to those challenges? So as part of our COVID update, I appreciate this is going to be very, very small for you online. But essentially what we wanted to do was to set out what did lockdown look like? What did it mean? Trying our best to interpret the government's outputs on this. But thinking about what does it mean for different parts of the economy, what were the different stages when they were going to come in, what did that look like for those businesses, so that you were better able to speak to anyone who came to you about what the future was likely to be for them in their area. So for example, on here, this was, as you can appreciate, written the start of the year, but what were the places that were least likely to come back? So those places that were shut down at the start, pubs, nightclubs, etc. When were they thinking about maybe getting back? When was non-essential retail going to get a chance? What happened in schools, etc. So the aim was to make sure that you could talk to anyone. It wasn't just private sector businesses. We wanted to give a spread on that. Obviously, we've been through all of these easings and we're now sort of winding our way back into it. The way that we delivered this to Semlet was in an editable PDF, a PDF PowerPoint. So what you could do is obviously amend these in real time. And now that we're going back to potentially different stages of lockdown, etc., this framework was editable. So you could go back and change these and update these so that your toolkit was always in date, which when working on anything like this is just so critical because everything changes, as you'll be aware, very quickly.
with the announcements yesterday with regards to the new restrictions, we're looking at this actual slide is like a more cyclical thing, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3. We could just keep going in circles and going in circles, but it's a very, very useful slide to understand and give you ideas in different areas as to which bits will be in which point in time. And I think that with the government not 100% sure as to how it's all going to go and not really wanting to put us back into a second lockdown, understanding how to manage these key areas is really important.
Yeah, and then following on from this, what we also wanted to think about was some of the behavioural aspects to it. So how would it impact different sectors over time? So for example, we're thinking about consumer, you know, it was the initial, well, your stores have been shut down, so you can't do sort of in-person selling, but you know, exploding online opportunities, and then you know the recovery was expected to be, you know, the first half, first thinking V-shape. So the second that retail could open again, people rush back. We saw with, you know, pubs, etc., that things like help out to eat out really did bring people back at quite some speed. But then how would that level out over time? So we wanted to, you know, it's interesting to have a look through some of these and see how accurate we got it back at the start of the year. But really thinking again from a sector or industry perspective, you know, what would lockdown look like? How long would it take to unwind? And was there any sort of longer trend in there that would play out? So, you know, one of the obvious ones would be gyms, etc. So, you know, shutting down immediately, we saw lots of businesses move to doing things online and virtually, and then them having to remodel how they think about their properties going forward, with the trend being more working from home and obviously less people commuting into office spaces where their facilities maybe were. So just trying to start thinking about some of those behavioural and trend changes over time.
Yeah, and just now, sorry. Sorry, Tom.
No, Karen.
I was going to say, just to overlay this one, is that the Bank of England, Tom just mentioned the V. The Bank of England did predict that we had such a sharp fall, but it would be a very sharp rise again. That was their initial outlook, with the recovery would be so much like a V. Now, looking at it now, if the Bank of England haven't quite updated since yesterday, whether the V is more of a W. But yeah, the recovery is something just to watch. It's a movable feast. The V was the fact we went sharp down and they were expecting sharp back up again. The second wave and the new restrictions may change that. So the outlooks on this slide might be different, but with the, you know, the request that we all work from home as much as we can, you know, the things like the online, for example, the gyms is a very, very good example. The online fitness, you know, they will become more prominent. Digital again will continue to rise. I did have a meeting with the Department of Work and Pensions yesterday, and what they found is that the number of jobs is still there, but they tend to be in the logistics, in the drivers, in the low skilled area. They cannot get enough in construction, they cannot get enough in logistics. But if you look at the other areas like automotive, maybe industrials, machinery, leisure and tourism, there aren't as many jobs. So it's looking at that V shape, but looking at it in connection with the sectors that you are interested in.
And I think, Ruth, that point's so key, especially when thinking about Brexit, that it's so difficult to make assumptions about even a sector. You know, it's so dependent on the individual business model. So, you know, if you just take consumer, for example, you know, if you were selling, depending on what segment of the market you were selling to and your ability to meet that demand via, you know, online sales, etc. Some companies in, you know, retail have seen 300-400% increases in what they sell, because, you know, the people they're selling to are, you know, working professional services jobs, can work from home, haven't had a pay cut, and now not commuting, so are pocketing a whole load of money that they would have been spending elsewhere, and are choosing to spend it with them. Whereas others aren't hitting this, either the same demographic or, you know, unable to meet online sales in the same way, and therefore suffering massive losses and potentially going out of business. So it is really hard to try and pick out sector narratives that are accurate, it does come down so much to individual businesses. But where possible, just trying to help get the thinking out there about what it might look like at that slightly higher level. And then again back with the behavioural changes and trying to dig a little bit deeper into this and see what might shift and what might not. So in here we had some accelerating trends that have already started, slowing and reversing trends, and then innovation, and people coming up with new ways of doing things. So I don't want to talk about this in too much detail, but it was essentially thinking about how does the movement into lockdown change the way we do work. So for example, at Grant Thornton, probably far too much reliance on physical one-to-one meetings, actively going to clients, talking to them face to face. We've found that we can do so much of our work remotely through platforms like this, and we won't be going back to doing things the way we were. The obvious one, I think, for most businesses has been an acceptance of remote working. Presenteeism was abound everywhere. People didn't think they could actually do their job from home. Managers didn't trust that people working for them would actually do any work. We've just seen that been blown completely out of the water, and lots of businesses, including our own, thinking about what sort of office space do we need? Do we need to have 1,000 desks in central London? Probably not. Can we change the way we work? Similarly, on here we're talking about buying local, for example. Transport has been a massive one. I think it's certainly sat here in London clear that more people are riding bikes, but certainly more people are driving cars. So how do these behavioural changes of the population then impact the businesses that you're working with and those organisations? So how can they take advantage of the changes? What are they doing to respond to different needs, etc.? And just trying to help them think about things like that. But seeing it much more as an opportunity rather than a risk, a way of either saving money from a business point of view or serving a new need that maybe wasn't there in the past.
Yeah, just on this slide, what we have found is it's an opportunity for businesses to reassess their business model. Think about where there can be efficiencies, savings, where are the opportunities. In the whole of the pandemic, yes, there was a lot of fear, but we've seen a lot of opportunities, a lot of the digital developments that businesses were looking at have been brought forward probably by 2-3 years even, and we're ahead of the game now. So it's any business that you're speaking to, or any business that wants to talk to us, we're going to look at the opportunities, not necessarily all the threats.
And talking about sort of world events and things that often get thought of as purely as a threat, Brexit. So when we did the update, wanted to make sure that we were talking about the most relevant issue to business at the time, which was obviously COVID, but conscious that Brexit was going to rear its head again. And I think all of you will be very aware that sort of after the summer holidays, Brexit just flew back up the agenda. I think we saw businesses dealing with COVID through the first half of the year, management frankly being completely exhausted, going away for summer holidays, recharging a bit, and then coming back and being hit square in the face by the fact that, okay, there's only 4 months to go, we need to get back on Brexit, dust off the plans, understand what's going on. So to try and make sure that everyone who used this toolkit was able to talk clearly, accurately about what was going on with regards to Brexit, we just put a bit of information in here. So focusing on the fact that we were in transition, that there is essentially a choice at the end of this year around whether we get a deal or not, and then thinking about what does that mean for business. So I think the most important point that we take from this this part of the workbook was really around the fact that whether the UK gets an FTA or whether it leaves with no deal, actually the steps that businesses need to take are incredibly similar. The government's stated ambition of a free trade agreement still represents a massively detached economic relationship with Europe. No single market participation, no customs union, no free movement of labour, and all of the associated rights. That's a massive change. So actually the differences between no deal and an FTA for many businesses are quite small, and therefore there was actually quite a lot of certainty around some of the steps that businesses could take to be ready. We've certainly seen that this sort of mental block in preparation, businesses going pretty much they can't believe that this outcome will happen, and they can't find any details around what they need to do, etc. And it's simply a case that they're either not looking hard enough, or they refuse to believe the information that's right there in front of them. So wanted to try and give the advisors the confidence to talk about what was going on, explain in simple terms that made sense to business, where we were with Brexit, what the options might be, and what that means for them. And one thing we put in, it wasn't massive to South East Midlands, but just important to talk around, Northern Ireland and the special relationship that it was sort of promised. We'll see whether it gets delivered as part of the withdrawal agreement, and the nuances between trading with Northern Ireland and trading with, say, mainland Europe, and the differences in there. But essentially, we kept the time.
Sorry,
I was just saying, we kept the timeline really quite simple. It's funny looking at this because obviously we've moved on somewhat since there, but these things at the end don't change. So transition got obviously ruled out. We now call this fudge option, where some sort of compromise is made. But again, look, it was no deal or there's a free trade agreement. We were saying that years ago, but now with 99 days left until that's still exactly the choice on the table. Nothing has changed since we wrote this book, really. But just something there that got it in people's minds that the 31st of December at 11 p.m. Key date, and then there was going to be change that comes after that. Things that aren't on there are from the 1st of January, obviously. The UK is going to have a new immigration regime. We've got more details on that now. There's going to be, new border operating processes. We've got more information on that. So, they've started to fill in some of the blanks that we've predicted, and we'll go through further on in this talk. But it was just about, sort of how do you put Brexit on a page as best you can, and signpost, the key dates, and help businesses think about what those outcomes might be and how they respond to them.
Yeah, you've covered what I was going to say mostly. But what I will say to everybody on this call is when you are talking to businesses, please ensure that the EU exit is now coming up the agenda quite high, because it will happen. It is going to happen, whether it's a no deal or a free trade agreement. As Tom's rightly said, there's not much difference. So we're working towards this no deal EU exit, and businesses have to be prepared for every eventuality that entails. If we get something better than that, brilliant. But if we prepare for a no deal, no free trade agreement, then we will all be prepared as businesses, and then we can work forward from there.
Yeah. So that was, a few slides that we did around, setting the scene for business. And then what we did was we broke down, as I said earlier, sort of into 5 key areas for those conversations to center around. So, importing and exporting, suppliers and supply chain, finance, regulation, legal and data, and people. What we tried to do with each of these was structure sort of over 2 pages around each one, sort of, what are the potential changes that might be coming down the line, what are the questions that they need to be asking themselves and able to answer, and the steps that they can take, and then obviously linking off where possible to additional guidance or specific resources from SEMLEP. So if we just talk through this page, Brexit, what's the number one thing that comes up? It's tariffs. It's moving goods across borders. That's where most businesses are going to feel the biggest change. So just wanting to, again, as sort of said earlier, think about what does this mean for a business. So no longer being part of the customs union means additional sort of bureaucracy at borders. Regulatory divergence, the fact that the UK will no longer be following exactly the same, or has the potential to no longer follow the exact same rule book as Europe, meaning that goods don't automatically receive sort of approval to move around. Tariffs, I can't tell you the number of times spoken to businesses about tariffs, and there is so much confusion about the UK global tariff, the EU's common external tariff, FTAs and WTO, and there's so many different names for different things, and the confusion that has brought in. Tariffs is the one area where the really big difference between a deal and no deal. It's absolutely correct to say that there's not masses of difference in the steps that businesses need to take to prepare, but there is a massive difference specifically to certain sectors around whether a deal is agreed or not. We've been working with lots of businesses in automotive and food and beverage, for example, where the difference between a trade deal or not is 22% to 80% tariffs on everything they make. So it's essentially the difference between them surviving or them not. And that's true of a number of sectors where tariffs are particularly high, and barriers to trade on lesser deals are quite significant. Another thing we want to think about, VAT changes. So obviously moving goods, there's VAT due on those. And then again, back to some of these behavioural things. So we've seen, back in 2016, after the vote, had talking to clients around, decisions that suppliers or customers have made to not source from them because, one client wouldn't have stuff bought from them because the person who was supplying to them from them was angry at the vote and didn't want to do any business with the UK. Others have found, certainly more recently, that businesses, especially in continental Europe, are less sure that they'll be able to continue to deliver as they have been over time. So almost preempting disruption and an inability to supply from a UK side, and frankly thinking, well, I'd much rather deal with a mainland European supplier who provides exactly the same service or good as the UK than risk potentially being in a spot of bother when Brexit actually happens. So things that may not entirely be rational, decisions at an emotional level, for example, are all things that we've certainly seen happen. So wanted to flag. And then again, this point around Northern Ireland. And look, I mean, the rules haven't even been finalised yet, so we don't know exactly what they're going to look like, but they're going to be different to, assuming that we follow them, different to the UK's relationship with Europe potentially. So what we just did was a quick sort of tariff implication table. So just sort of saying, what changes, what does it look like if we get a free trade agreement and if we don't, and thinking about the differences that there are there. And you'll see there are lots of similarities across that. I don't want to go into too much detail on it, but just trying to try and answer and preempt some of the questions that we thought we might be getting around this topic. So that was sort of what are the challenges, what might happen type issues, and then what can you do ahead of that. So thinking sort of around three main buckets of continuity, so keeping things going as they are, business as usual type things. Compliance, and making sure you don't fall foul of any new rules, etc. And then the final one was cost, and it's not necessarily on all of the 5 sections that comes out, but we've got additional steps here. So from a continuity point of view, thinking about the different changes that you're going to have to make to continue doing what you want to do now. So we did a workshop with a client not that long ago who sells garden furniture into Europe, and they approached us saying, I want to know where's the best place to set up my subsidiary in the EU to enable me to continue to sell, it was garden lighting to home base equivalent across Europe, and very quickly established that you don't need to set up a subsidiary. It's literally just making sure you have the right processes in place. So they needed to get a French VAT registration number and change their invoices so that they were quoting the French VAT number on all of their European sales, and obviously the UK one in Europe. So steps like that, which actually saves them masses of money because they don't need to go through all of the hassle, etc. But just you can do that now. It's relatively small cost, but now you're ready for whatever happens in 2021. Obviously, reviewing markets, lots of businesses decided that, look, what they were selling to certain markets was really low margin, frankly, not in enough scale to merit continuing, and decided to change that. And others have obviously thought about whether there'll be new opportunities that might come from free trade deals that the UK is aiming to strike on its own. Compliance, you're kind of similar to some of the continuity stuff, but making sure you have your EU EORI number, and then if you need it, export licensing, etc. My favourite thing to talk about at the moment is certainly in these additional steps around government funding. It's practically the only thing that the government is funding right now, and it is all about declarations and custom skills, etc. So you can get money from government, quite a significant amount actually, for training either delivered by yourself or by a third party, and for recruitment of specific skills. So there are there are pockets of money out there, not many, but those that are there, we are keen to push, and I'm sure no business doesn't mind hearing about free money from government. Calculating the possible tariff impact, as I said, lots of confusion about the tariff schedules and what they mean, but with a little bit of work, you can quite easily work out the numbers that are involved. And we've had businesses where tariffs, even the UK's new global tariff is it's going to add £10 million to their operations. So I mean, the numbers can be very, very big. The numbers can be very, very small. We've worked, some clients will see a net benefit because the UK has essentially simplified its tariff schedules. So if something was 14.2, it's now 14, and it's rounded down where possible on a number of things, which can add a benefit. Communication, absolutely key. I mean, this comes across on every single point, but those businesses who are speaking to their customers, letting them know what's going on, keeping dialogue going, and being open to talking through, and just explaining that, we've seen it with COVID. Look, these are the rules. We're trying our best to do it. They're the ones who are keeping customers happy, loyal, and continuing to pay, etc. Talked a little bit about opportunities, and then further government resources. So they've obviously launched, since we did this, their new gov.transition website, which is better than the old one. Still a good one-stop shop for anyone who's not done anything. Had a call last week with a TV production company who had done nothing at all, and told them to have a go at that, just to get sort of a brain dump of everything that might matter. But their government, to their credit, has got some good resources out there that are worth pointing out. As I said earlier, some questions to ask, just to get a sense of where issues might be. And I suppose Ruth will have views on how much people use these questions, or actually how confident. I think my guess is that the advisors, once you've done a few calls, you get a bit more confident about the issues that are coming up, start to tailor them for themselves, and actually get a sense quite quickly of where they need to ask and where they don't. Is that fair, Ruth?
Yeah, that is absolutely fair, and we are working at this present moment in time to come together with an EU exit sort of package to understand. We're redoing our deep dive immersement into EU exit and everything that's happening as we've come out of COVID. We're diving straight back into EU exit, so we will be coming out with something in the next few weeks with regards to EU exit and everything. But yeah, those questions, it's just getting businesses to think about it. What we have found is that businesses have put it way under the carpet. It's not going to happen. It is going to happen now, and really people need to stick their heads up and go, we really need to think about it. And imports and exports is going to be the biggest thing.
Yeah, I need to remember to keep calling it EU exit.
All right, you can call it Brexit. We're not
allowed. Suppliers and supply chain. So again, I think this is one where COVID just bitten already. So what were the challenges we were seeing? And supply chain resilience. So especially financial viability across the supply chain, security of supply. So can you just guarantee that you're going to get the get the goods? Are your suppliers going to be able to survive whatever happens, and continue to set you up? And I think what we've certainly seen is just the number of businesses who have either through COVID, got a real sort of guarantee that their supply chain is rock solid, really resilient, real confidence in their ability to navigate Brexit, or those who went, my word, this isn't in a good place, and have subsequently taken a lot of steps to have, instead of one provider, try and find 4 or 5, explore opportunities to get them in from different countries, etc.
Yeah.
So that's massive, I think.
It is massive, and what we found recently, and it was a bit of information I found out yesterday, with regards to supply of laptops, mobile phones, most of these came from China, and goods aren't coming from China anymore, and there's delays to everything. So it's COVID has really put the highlight on reassessing your suppliers and your supply chain. Where are you getting them from? How are you going to get your supplies? If you sell computer equipment, where are you going to get it from if you can't get it from China? And it really has blown out the water, suppliers and supply chain, and made businesses reassess production, supply, and everything that goes with that.
Yeah, and alongside that, thinking about cost increases, delays, as we've touched on there, and then finally, just because we do need to talk about Brexit, just that contractual point around, we've certainly seen that some suppliers, especially with Incoterms around delivery of goods, are saying, well, I'll deliver it anywhere in the EU, which covered you until January next year, at which point it won't. So lots of subtle changes to contracts that you might not have thought about with suppliers, that you just need to be on top of, and making sure that you've agreed this before January next year, when they say, yeah, it's sat in the warehouse in Italy, you're coming to get it, when normally it was delivered to your door. So little things like that certainly we wanted to pull out. Again, steps that we could take, we talked around communicating. I think that's clear on everything. Agreeing plans with them sort of links into the above. Many of these were really, I think, will have been picked up through your COVID work. So you'll understand the financial stability of your supply chain. If they're handling COVID well and confident, and your conversations with them are positive, then they should be in a good position. And if they're openly talking to you about Brexit, brilliant, shows you that they're thinking about it. The number one way to find out where they are is to ask. You'd be amazed how many businesses have not spoken to customers or suppliers about it. So we had a company who they run all of the call centers for people like Homebase, that sort of business, and none of their customers, so the big stores, had spoken to them about Brexit. So if you're running a big company like that, you'd think that your Brexit plan would include what happens when people call up with queries. You think you'd need to be telling the people running those call shots what your plans are, how to handle it, etc. So the fact they hadn't made them a little bit worried, and got them to go and have a look. So simply just asking the question, I think, it sounds really obvious, but it does open a lot of doors. Plan for recovery, it's sort of a given with everything that's going on. Diversifying markets, I spoke a little bit about that. Contracts, as I said, make sure you're looking at them, make sure that they're incorporating the necessary changes, and that you're happy with what they've put in there. And then border disruption, depending on who you ask, it's either going to be a complete car crash, or it's going to be absolutely fine. The government, I think I saw yesterday, saying potentially 2 days at certain ports, etc. So what can you do to mitigate that? So stockpiling where possible, and it's very clear that businesses have got a lot smarter at stockpiling than last time, more strategic. They know what they need.
Just on top
keeping
of
less.
Stockpiling though, everybody did the stockpiling sort of at the beginning of the year. With COVID, there isn't the cash flow around to stockpile again.
No.
As to see what will happen when people realise we get closer to the deadline. We haven't got the stock. Haven't got the cash to get the stock. So it's going to be an interesting culmination of effects with COVID.
And so much of that comes into conversations with the suppliers, because what you'll see is where suppliers are bringing stuff in from overseas, it may be that the supplier is stockpiling for you. We certainly talking to businesses who are moving large amounts of stock into the UK ahead of to then distribute out over a longer period. So it may be that you yourself don't need to take the weight and the burden of doing that. It might be that your suppliers are doing it for you. So it's one of those things around just have that conversation, which I can't push hard enough. Conscious of time, just finance. So thinking about exchange rates, interest rates, FX, etc. God, I mean, this was all chaotic over COVID, but Brexit. Yeah, I think that the key things to pick out here are, interest rates have rock bottom. Bank of England not looking at moving them particularly fast, but have modelled. The important thing is that they have modelled rising to 5% based on Brexit. They will decide as things happen, obviously. So it's not to say it's going to happen, but it's just to say, look, they're looking at it, they've thought about it. So for those who are really up on their financial modelling, that it's exchange rates that I think most people are looking at from a Brexit point of view, and we can really expect the volatility to come 15th, 16th of October with the next council meeting, end of November when the deadline is for getting legislation in front of Europe. Things are going to start to move very, very quickly, and we know that currency traders are more than happy to overreact to any piece of information that they find. So the volatility could be quite spectacular. I mean, the spreads are huge, and cost increases. From a finance point of view, one thing that isn't in this that I think a lot of businesses will be looking at is what government support was there through COVID, what were they making use of, what might come back. The Chancellor's looking at things today. Furlough ends next month. All of that. There's lots of pockets of money with the C bills, etc., that were available. How much of that is going back? How much are they using that? All of those sorts of things play in that weren't even around or even a consideration when we were pulling this toolkit together. Put a little bit in here around what the forecasts were, so just economic growth, etc., from both of these. Again, I mean, we were talking about 5% less growth over 15 years. COVID came in and smacked 10% off the economy overnight. So, frankly, a lot of these impacts have been dwarfed or merged into COVID response. But what can businesses? Sorry, yeah.
I was going to say, there's going to be a budget in November as well that will impact, and then there's the US presidential that might affect finance. And then,
which is not on this timeline, but is on the other one.
Finance, in the sense of, yes, the government is going to be closing furlough. It's going to be looking at coming out of its financial support for COVID. But even if you think that your business is not affected by EU exit, it will be affected because of the cost of bringing in goods from overseas. If your supply chain is anything that has to be imported, then finance is going to be massive. And also your own cash flows. We want businesses to absolutely think about their own cash flows. Finance was one of those aspects that many businesses just thought, well, it's there, we're fine. COVID has blown that out of the water. Everybody looks at their cash flow now. We don't want that we want people to continue to think finance, absolutely vital.
And just that point around budget, I think everyone thought in spring, oh wow, budget's going to be huge, like it's going to be a real massive one. Expectations are being revisited, shall we say. Quite clear that because COVID's impact is ongoing, the Chancellor isn't exactly sure of where he stands, the country stands. So it may be that he's obviously set the ground to just do an update, not provide any changes, etc. So and it may be that budget in full gets kicked a bit longer, and that what we see is more COVID responses, etc. But it's quite clear that the government's going to have to do something, and it will be interesting to see where it is and what sort of things they target with that support. But it's all about for businesses keeping an eye out, making sure they've got that, really understanding their break-even point. So me and Ruth spoke a lot about this back when we started writing the toolkit at the start of the year. Just in plain English, like how bad can it get before you stop, or you have to stop. So just understanding that to give you a sense of where you are, almost a a barometer of performance, etc. Save money where you can. It sounds silly, but just if they're talking about people not buying that coffee every day in Pret, businesses just reducing discretionary spend, looking to be as lean as possible going into this, chasing up overdue payments, just making sure your invoices are paid. Some real business basics in there, frankly. Speak to bit again communication, but we work with a lot of banks and finances, and if you call them up on January the 1st and go, I'm in real trouble, you're not getting anything. But if you've had a conversation with them, you've shared your plans, you've shown how you intend to what is the problem you've identified, how do you intend to cover it, what do you need, etc., you're much more likely to get the help that you need than if you just turn up when it's all gone wrong and ask for a bailout. Deals, so much M&A going on, or potential to go on over the coming months, and rebuilding cash reserves, which sort of ties a little bit into cost base, but just thinking about how can you be as liquid as possible and give yourself the flexibility to navigate what's going on. This is something we added in sort of a bit later on. So we did a summary of all of the measures that was brought in by government, what they did and who they applied for. So on each of these is just a hyperlink off to the government page explaining what was available, how to apply, etc., etc. But just to give everyone a summary of, there you go. So you knew that no matter who you were talking to, back deferral, job retention scheme, time to pay, all there. If it was a smaller businesses, what type of funds were there? Obviously some sectors, bingo halls getting picked out. There was some quite niche government support available, but just trying to put that all in one place.
Before you move on to regulation, I just have one question, which on the finance aspect from Gary is, with countries struggling with their economies due to COVID-19, how will it be possible to forecast possible changes in exchange rates and their impacts with any certainty? Would it be best for businesses to do a sensitivity analysis of a range of scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen the forecasting. So I did a piece of work for our audit practice around what does the next 12 months look like. And, so much of the modeling is just outdated the second it's written. So if you look at the forecasts for most, it's focusing purely on COVID, and the biggest sort of change that they model is is there a second wave, is there not a second wave, and that's sort of all of their modeling for the next 12 months. None of them include a Brexit analysis. So whereas COVID will have an impact across different countries with infection rates, lockdowns, etc., which will obviously impact on FX. Brexit, I think, is the key one. Yes, it's obviously going to be impacted depending on which jurisdiction you're trading with. But we talked about the US election. What happens there with FX? You can make there are different scenarios and modelling that's done on each of those. So it's almost a case of working out. So if it's pound euro, great. That's simple enough. But then working for a different scenario. So is it no deal, no COVID, etc. It is the spread. Obviously, it's not an exact science. The modelling that we looked at from a range of different providers, as I think was highlighted on one of the slides earlier, was saying that depending on whether there was a deal or not, the pound would be anywhere from 0.9 with the euro to 1.2. That's huge. That's a massive spread. It's not, it's not. It's about, I suppose, with modelling, obviously making assumptions and picking a tolerance that you think is reasonable. I think the other point with FX is that we've seen it spike at certain dates, and therefore it's, as I said, 15th, 16th of October, there'll be days in there. So the question is obviously, what are there specific dates that matter to you? Are you changing, is it daily that your FX has an impact, or are you moving money at certain times when it's, you're doing key orders at, every quarter, for example, and then thinking about, well, are there actual scenarios that play out that impact the timing of that? So, we've seen businesses think about, making, giving themselves a bit more time in 2021 to see if things settle down. So if there's a the key thing from an FX point of view is that obviously no deal is not an end state. It's not this is where the UK stops and it's going to be there forever. It will, from their build up relationships, etc., etc. People will look at us and judge the country as a whole on, is that the sort of place I want to be? How competent are they handling this? All of this. So it's an incredibly messy thing, but I would say that your best bet is to, as you say, pick through a few scenarios, but really do check the assumptions of the modelling that you're looking at, because some of the obvious, like the OBR, for example, hasn't modelled anything on no deal. Lots of the big, economics houses, whatever you want to call them, those sorts of forecasters are looking at COVID and COVID alone. So I think it is really important to make sure that that you're getting the latest on Brexit modelling, because actually that's the one that's likely to have the biggest impact on the pound, certainly against the euro in the coming months. Hope that answers a bit of it. Essentially, I think absolutely everything you say is what I would be doing.
Time comes, so we need to.
I'll just rattle through this one. Just as I said, I talked a little bit about legal. The big one on this is data and standards. So standards, what labeling, who are you selling to, what rules are you meeting? Is it UK rules? Is it EU rules? Who's your testing house? Lots different sectors massively impacted in different ways. So animal and plant health is frankly a warren. And data, just leaving the EU's data protection rules, etc. The issue is not UK to EU data transfers; it's EU to UK. But there are steps that we've covered in here that businesses can take. But a lot of it is around checking your contracts, making sure that your supply chain is compliant. Following things closely. It sounds obvious, but look, the government's about to dump a whole load more information on businesses shortly with both COVID and Brexit. So, the data changes all the time, making sure that yours is up to date. The key point on that being that any planning you did at the start of the year may be outdated because things have changed. So just dusting off your old Brexit plan isn't good enough. You need to make sure it's up to date. Understanding where you're exposed, taking the steps that the Information Commissioner's Office put in for people, for data transfers, etc., and just checking the small print. Those are sort of the key things, and we've got the links there that you need on there. And finally, people, massive impact for some, very little for others. Frankly, with settled status and the challenges around recruitment, with coronavirus in a strange way, with the impact it's going to have on unemployment, etc., it's going to take the pressure off that was going to be there. If you still had really high employment in the UK and then you turned off the tap on EU nationals sort of overnight, was potential there to be some quite difficult conversations around recruiting the skills that you need. That has been dampened somewhat. There's silver lining on a really dark cloud. But what are people worried about at the moment? The challenges, mostly it's around mobility, so UK nationals doing any sort of work in Europe, and the trips, the regulations, the visas, the healthcare, the insurance, the 6 months on a passport, the international driver's license, etc. There's a long list of things that you need to be thinking about. We talked a bit about some of the COVID stuff as well. So obviously, moving people back off furlough, rising employment costs from things like an increased minimum wage, etc. We put the European challenges in there, the steps that businesses can take. Again, it's communication. So many EU nationals in the UK still don't know what they're entitled to with settled status or haven't applied for it. Making sure your workplace is COVID safe, keeping spend down where possible. Lots of competition in geographies. So we've seen, if you're in a business location and there's 4 or 5 different factories or warehouses there, then one business puts their pay up by £1 an hour and suddenly everyone leaves and moves over. It can get really competitive. So thinking about how do you make yourself the most attractive place to work, upskilling, so you don't need, use the apprenticeship levy, use if you're paying it, I appreciate that's for slightly bigger companies, but use use all the funding that's out there. And from an EU perspective, just understand where you are. Do you have any EU nationals? Do you travel overseas? If the answer is no for you, great. If it's no for you, but in your supply chain, then just make sure that they're doing all the steps that they need to be in there. And obviously the government's launched has launched all of the information around the new immigration regime, the points system, as they like to describe it. The thresholds, the salary thresholds have come down. Depending on what you're doing, you may qualify for some additional points in there. So the immigration picture is clearer than it was. It's better than it was, but still potential for there to be quite a lot of change in there. And then finally, just we put this together. If you've only got 5 minutes with someone and you want to say what are the 3 things to focus on: continuity, compliance, and cost, and that communication runs across all of those, and that you need to have an open dialogue. So breathe, run through all of that, but just like to think that it covers off the big things that businesses are asking about. It should give them some confidence that there are steps that can be taken to prepare whatever happens, and that frankly there are opportunities out there, and to use this as a chance to sometimes step back, think about what you're doing, why you do it that way, and whether that's the best way to continue in 2021.